I've been talking to people walking here. We've been talking about next year, and I'm sitting there saying, I'm not going to be here.
Lay down a list of what is wrong, things you told them all along. Pray to God he hears you, and pray to God he hears you. And where did I go wrong? I lost a friend somewhere along in the bitterness.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Backfired, an NBA history podcast about bad teams, bad luck, and bad decisions. My name is Lewis, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about Magic Johnson. A very happy 63rd birthday to Magic Johnson this past weekend, by the way. But we're not going to talk about his, I'll call it his main playing career in the 1980s because, he won 5 championships. He went to the finals 9 times. He was MVP 3 times. The Lakers never won fewer than 54 games in the 12 consecutive seasons the Magic played from 80 to 91. He only failed to advance past the first round 1 time in those 12 seasons. Magic Johnson was pretty good. And I'm not even talking about his abrupt retirement in November of 1991 at the age of 32.
Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers today.
No, I'm not qualified in any way to discuss HIV or AIDS, the latter of which, thankfully, he does not have. But even if I was, that moment is one of the most iconic, in a bad way, iconic and memorable moments, not only in NBA history, but in American culture. Because, he was a superstar. He was, at the time, considered by many to be the greatest basketball player of all time. He had a very high Q rating, second only to reigning MVP and finals MVP Michael Jordan. I sound like Bill Simmons talking about Q rating, but it is a real thing. I'm not making it up. But that clip that I just played was from the live press conference on CNN. It was the front page story of every major newspaper in the US and Canada on November 8th of 1991. And I did check, not on the front page, but it was in the newspapers in several other countries on November 9th of 1991. With a 17-hour difference from Los Angeles, I think I will cut the Sydney Morning Herald some slack. Although, 17 hours, you'd think they would have leaked the news in that time. But the Magic retirement was like the Jordan retirement or the Jordan return or the second retirement. I can't really add anything to that or the collective understanding of that. It's been covered completely from every angle by other people who are much better writers and much better podcasters than I am. But what I can add is information about Magic's basketball dealings after his 1991 retirement. So I'm going to leave out his time running the Lakers from 2017 to 2019 because I think there is enough there for a full episode on that by itself. But there are 4 interesting things that Magic did after his retirement in 1991. So first, he tried to make a comeback in 1992, did not end up following through on that, so we'll find out why. Second, he was an investor in one of the several groups that was trying to found the eventual Toronto Raptors. Third, he was the head coach of the Lakers in 1994. I don't think that many people remember that or even knew it in the first place. If you're 35 or younger like I am, I would assume that you may not know, but maybe that's a bad assumption. And then finally, he made a real comeback as a player, not as a coach this time, in 1996. So let's talk about his first comeback attempt because it happened in stages. So when he retired in 1991, he didn't play in the 91-92 season except for in the 1992 All-Star game where he was voted in as a starter and decided to play. Now, in the beginning, there were some players who were a little skeptical about sharing the court with Magic, but as we all know, to quote a really good Twitter dunk, NBA players do not have penetrative sex during basketball games, so the risk of transmission is basically zero. But he did play, and the All-Star game in 1992 is really awesome. The final couple of minutes is the Magic Johnson show. I will put a link to a YouTube video in the description that you should watch because it absolutely rocks. The game is completely out of reach. The West is up by 30 or 35 points. Magic hits 2 threes in a row, then he's out of the play for a few possessions. Then he gets a sick pass to Dan Marley for a layup, forces Isaiah Thomas to throw up an air ball, raises his arms in triumph. Marley dunks. Magic gets a stop on Michael Jordan. And then Jordan, down 35, is playing such tight defense on Magic Johnson on the final possession. But the entire crowd in Orlando at the All-Star game is just clamoring. They're on their feet. They want Magic to get one final shot. Michael finally relents. Isaiah switches onto him, and Magic throws up just a wild shot for 3, and it goes in. And then there's like 15 seconds left on the clock, but it doesn't matter. Everyone is swarming Magic, and it's an incredible moment.
Three-pointer, yes! Oh, my! 3 straight trays for Johnson at the end of the game.
The best thing was that after he made it, they just stopped, okay? The East was not going to take another shot. That's how it should end.
I cried when I watched it. It was just so awesome. Magic finished with 25 points and 9 assists and 1 All-Star MVP. He was a commentator on NBC for a few games. He was very inexperienced, interrupted Mike Fratello and Marv Albert with irrelevant stories from his time with the Lakers, but he did get better over time. That was his gig during the 1992 playoffs. And then he played on the Dream Team in the 1992 Olympics in Barcelona and played 6 out of 8 games, did hurt his knee against Croatia, but Michael Jordan said that he and his teammates on the Dream Team initially had some skepticism, not about the HIV thing really anymore, because they'd all, for the most part, gotten past that, but about, Magic has not played basketball other than an All-Star game in like a year. Is he still Magic Johnson? But after the first practice, Jordan said, okay, Magic doesn't have the same stamina. He's not in the same shape that all the other players are from, being active for the past year, but otherwise he's the same guy. Quote, it was just like old times. He still started the break, ran the break, and dished it off like he always has. Chuck Daly of the Bad Boy Pistons was the Dream Team coach, and he said, quote, basically he hasn't missed a beat. He's the same player he always was, and in fact, he's trying harder now than he ever has. So that began to fuel speculation that he would return to the NBA. On draft night in 1992, when the Lakers drafted Anthony Peeler, who is an episode candidate for sure, he has made some major mistakes in his life. Boy, I will tell you. Ernie Johnson interviewed Magic after the pick to talk mostly about Peeler, but then closed the interview by saying, hey, Lakers, you think you could crack the starting lineup? Wink, wink. To which Magic smiled and said, yeah, I think I could. So at the Olympics, Magic played well. He didn't play a whole bunch, but he averaged 5.5 assists per game. He wanted to wait until after the Olympics to say anything about possibly returning to the Lakers. But on August 10th, the day after the Olympics ended, the LA Times reported that pending medical approval, Magic was going to return to the NBA. And that came as a surprise to the Lakers general manager, Jerry West, who said, quote, I absolutely know nothing about that. I sure wish Magic would talk to us. It's important for him to talk to the press, but we would like for him to talk to us about it too. But Magic stressed that it all came down to what his doctors said. He retired in the first place on the advice of this doctor, David Ho, who is incredible. Not only is he a leading virologist who made it to where HIV and AIDS is no longer a death sentence, he also more recently worked with Columbia University on research and development for the COVID vaccine. So he's a very smart guy. Magic retired on Dr. Ho's advice, and if Dr. Ho says that Magic is good to continue playing, then he would give it a go. Now, the Lakers still held his rights, and the Lakers technically had him on the injured list for the entire 91-92 season instead of officially marking him as retired. But Magic wasn't completely sold on a return to the Lakers at first. He mentioned that he might just ask Jerry West to trade him somewhere else, probably to Pat Riley's New York Knicks. But he cited concerns that with Charles Barkley in the Lakers division now after the trade from Philadelphia to Phoenix, and with the Clippers having just won 45 games, that the Pacific Division may not be the best place to try to win games. But eventually Magic said that if he returned, it would be to the Lakers. And Dr. Ho and Magic's other physician, Dr. Michael Mehlman, said that Magic's condition had improved a lot over the past year. And there was a lot of talk about T cells and the like in the articles. But the bottom line was that Magic was back on a massive contract extension, 1 year, $14.6 million, the largest single season salary at the time, fully guaranteed whether he played or not, which later would actually hamper the Lakers in a lot of future seasons because the year that he was paid that amount was not the upcoming season, but for 2 seasons in the future. And as such, that year, the Lakers did not have cap space, but they were also doing right by Magic. The Lakers did right by Kobe at the end of his career, even when he was horrible and coming off injuries. For better or for worse, it is the Laker way. But the plan was for Lakers coach Randy Fund to slowly reintegrate Magic. So he went to training camp, in Honolulu, but was only expected to play in 4 out of the 8 preseason games and was going to be on a heavy load management schedule in the regular season. So he would play both home and away games, but not on back-to-backs until around March, unless the flight was really short. But in the preseason, which teams used to take extremely seriously, by the way, Magic was playing well. In his first preseason game back in the Forum, he had 12 points and 14 assists. Another game in San Diego against the Kings, he had 14 points and 13 assists. And the team played extremely well when Magic was there, and of course, not as well without him, which makes complete sense. He's an all-time great, and he energized his teammates a lot. The 76ers played the Lakers with Magic in the preseason, and their coach, Doug Moe, said, quote, "With Magic, the Lakers are another team. That's no secret. With him, I think they're the best team in the West." After the Lakers' final preseason game against the Cavaliers in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where Magic went 1 of 10 from the field, he said, just a little rust. I'm ready for the NBA season. And then all of a sudden, he retired again. 4 days before the 92-93 season began, no press conference, nothing. He said that he didn't want the controversy surrounding him and his return to overshadow the game. There have been a lot of rumors lately, some published in the Sporting News, saying that Magic had gotten HIV through gay sex, that Magic was gay, that he was bisexual, and he confronted his ex-best friend, Isaiah Thomas, about the possibility that he was the wellspring of those rumors, a charge Thomas denied. But then the other alternative to some people was that he was using intravenous drugs, which Magic said he wasn't. He's saying over and over, like, he's being very upfront. He's like, I was rawing random women. I don't know who I got it from, but I know that's how I got it because I don't do drugs. I'm not gay. So, it makes sense that he wouldn't want to deal with that. He'd have to answer the same questions over and over, debunk the same rumors about drug abuse and his sexuality, which was a hot button issue. Anybody who is hanging on to misinformed beliefs that they would contract HIV from playing alongside him or against him, would have their soundbite or their headline, and he'd have to respond. Karl Malone was the most notable one. He challenged the idea that the virus couldn't be transmitted through basketball by showing that, after every game, look, I'm Karl Malone. I have all these open wounds and cuts and stuff on my arms after every game. So there's no way you can say with certainty that some of Magic's blood couldn't get into my bloodstream. Now, if Karl Malone truly believed that, I'm sure that he would have stayed home instead of going to Barcelona to be on the dream team. But, I'm sure he was too busy thinking about pedophilia at the time to, make that decision. There are also some fake scientists looking for their 15 minutes of fame, claiming, it's impossible for HIV to be transmitted through heterosexual sex, even without a condom. So Magic has to be gay. Magic didn't want to deal with that. It would be exhausting. I totally get that. So he walked away. And in Michael Jordan's words, chose to be remembered as an all-time great who loved the game and decided not to stir up a bunch of controversy, which Magic had the right to stir up, but he chose not to. And that's okay. His health was still as good as it could be, considering the circumstances. His doctors had maintained that he could play if he wanted, but, quote, "After much thought and talking it over with Cookie and my family, I've decided that I will retire for good from the Lakers." And while that wound up not being the case, he did step away for a little bit. So in the meantime, he worked toward another one of his life's goals, which was owning an NBA franchise that was not named the Boston Celtics. Am I right? So the NBA was looking to expand once more after just recently having added the Miami Heat, Orlando Magic, Minnesota Timberwolves, and Charlotte Hornets in 88 and 89. And this time they were looking into Canada. So this is, by this point, mid-1993. This would be the NBA's first foray into becoming a truly international league. So they took applications for domestic expansion as well. Cities like Tampa, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Nashville, among others, made bids. But the league was pretty set on going to Toronto in anticipation of, in the future, eventually being in Mexico City, which I doubt will happen other than this G League team. So there were 4 different groups vying for the honor of paying the league's massive expansion fee, which was over $100 million. To bring the NBA to Toronto. Vancouver, of course, came in around this time as well, but the Toronto bids began much earlier than the single Vancouver bid, and Jerry Colangelo really made that happen. This isn't relevant to Magic Johnson at all, but this is really funny to me, so I'll tell this story that I heard on another podcast that's really good, which you should go check out, with the second pick, Steve Francis. It's a Vancouver Grizzlies rewatch podcast. Those guys had the first owner of the Vancouver Grizzlies on, and he revealed something that was not publicized too much back in like 1993 and 1994. It was briefly mentioned in one of the local papers up there, but this guy had inherited the Vancouver Canucks of the NHL and was going to build a new stadium and needed a second tenant in the Canucks stadium. So this guy, Arthur Griffiths went down to Phoenix to speak to Jerry Colangelo about getting an arena football franchise in Vancouver, because Colangelo was also involved in the Arizona Rattlers arena football team. And Griffiths meets with Colangelo, and Colangelo says, hey, you know what can also fit in an NHL stadium pretty well is an NBA team. We're already in the process of getting a team in Toronto. You should do, instead of arena football, you should do NBA. And this guy, Arthur Griffiths, is just like, oh, yeah, sure. Okay, I don't care. And then because of poor planning, Griffiths became financially insolvent and had to sell the Grizzlies and the Canucks pretty early on. But Magic Johnson joined in on one of the investment groups trying to be awarded the franchise in Toronto. Now, Magic was not just a novelty, so he was putting in real money. He was slated not to be the majority owner, but a, quote, substantial owner of the team, according to his business manager. And Magic was planning on moving to Toronto full-time when the bid was formalized, because he was also going to be the general manager of the team if they won the bid. Now, while Magic was not going to be the majority owner of the team, he was kind of the de facto figurehead. He was still Magic. It would be like if LeBron were a 10% owner in the Vegas franchise that's coming in a few years. He'd be the most famous person involved in it, most likely, so he'd be the de facto figurehead. But Magic was not well-versed in the terms of the deal or the proposal at all, which made him not a good spokesperson for the group. In one Financial Post article, which was a newspaper in Toronto, Magic said, quote, I'll be the general manager or president or whatever. I'll run the whole basketball organization. I'll select the coaches, the players, whatever, which does not inspire confidence. But what inspired even less was that in a meeting with the NBA expansion committee headed by Jerry Colangelo, they grilled Magic on things that were relevant to NBA team ownership. So his group had already purchased land for a stadium that, if they were to build that stadium, it made sense to lease that stadium to the Toronto Maple Leafs. So the expansion committee asked, how many home games do hockey teams get per year? Which the answer is the same as for the NBA, 41, although at the time they did play 84 games, with 2 in neutral sites in cities that didn't have NHL teams like Saskatchewan and Indianapolis. But Magic, put on the spot, said, I'm not sure. I think 60. Now, Magic's group did not end up winning the bid, which is not surprising. But one of the other bids said that if they were awarded the franchise, that they would hire Magic for a front office role just to bring excitement to the NBA being in Toronto. But that group also wasn't awarded the franchise, and the one that was, in November of 1993, had Isaiah Thomas as the executive vice president over basketball operations. Isaiah Thomas's time running teams will be a future episode also. But once Magic was out of the running for a job in Toronto, he did consider getting involved with the Vancouver group, but eventually didn't. And he had turned down several unnamed offers to become a president or a general manager of an existing team, none of which were named for sure, but the Clippers were rumored. But after his ownership opportunities fell through, he flirted with another return to the Lakers as a player. That was really just a couple newspaper quotes. He had a special on Fox where he interviewed Garth Brooks, Whoopi Goldberg, and Shaq, foreshadowing his short-lived talk show in 1998, The Magic Hour. But a report had come out in April of 1993 that Lakers owner Jerry Buss was not happy with head coach Randy Fund and would eventually fire him. And Dr. Buss had asked Magic to be the head coach, which Magic declined to pursue team ownership in Toronto. Now, this, I'd say, was a little unfair to Fund because that was after Fund's first year as head coach. He'd been a longtime Lakers assistant, expected to be coaching a team with Magic Johnson in it in the 92-93 season, but Magic, of course, abruptly retired for a second time before the season. To hear more on that, go ahead and hit the rewind button about 100 times. That team went 39-43, and in 93-94, which was Fund's second season at the helm, he led them to a 27-37 record and had just been inked to a contract extension 11 days beforehand when he was fired at a seemingly random time. Now, the conventional thinking was that, one, Dr. Buss wanted Magic to get coaching reps in while the playoffs were out of reach to give him enough of the season to figure out how to coach at an NBA level. So, by the time he started, he had 16 games. And two, with Fund's extension, the thought was that Buss may have wanted to keep him around in the front office, but that never came to fruition. Eventually, he became the general manager of the Miami Heat under head coach and team president Pat Riley. Fund had been Riley's assistant for several years in LA. So Magic came in, and there was a mix of his former teammates like James Worthy, Kurt Rambis, Vlade Divac, but then there were a ton of young guys that he had never played with as well, like Anthony Peeler, Doug Christie, Antonio Harvey, George Lynch, last but not least, Nick Van Exel. And that mixture of players made it kind of hard for Magic. He had also been in the media since January, blasting the team for taking losses too lightly, in Magic's opinion. At one point, he said that they lacked pride, and he never thought that once he retired that the team would become so bad so quickly, which is exactly what you want to hear from the guy who's about to be your head coach. But the older guys, or in Vlade's case, Magic's former teammates, were super pumped up about this. Vlade was excited because when he was a rookie, he'd learned a lot from Magic. Kurt Rambis said Magic was basically already a coach on the floor when he was a player, but he acknowledged that, when you're wearing the suit and an absolutely garish tie, Magic had the worst tie collection of all time. Just Google search Coach Magic Johnson, but cover your eyes when you do it. But Rambis acknowledged that Magic was going to make mistakes. He was going to make the wrong decision at some points, but that was going to make him a better coach in the long run. But then during his introductory press conference, Magic drops yet another bomb and said, quote, "I'm happy to be back with the Laker family for however long it's going to be." And then he says that he may just be the interim coach because he's probably going to want to become a player again. So it just never ends. But Dr. Buss clarified that this is for Magic to see if he wants to be the head coach full-time. He and Jerry West fired Fund when they did to give Magic that opportunity because they were going to want a new coach to start the 94-95 season, whether it was Magic or Rick Pitino or Roy Williams or Bob Huggins. So Magic basically has a free 16-game test drive of the position. And if he doesn't want it after the season, Jerry West said that would be fine. They'll go after the big fish from the college ranks, but Magic would have the right of first refusal. Now, for Magic, he had said publicly that he would only continue on in the role if the team improved as a unit and as individuals, and if he enjoyed the job. But really, the sticking point was that he would only become the full-time head coach if Dr. Buss sold him a share of the team, which Dr. Buss made it very clear that his children were going to inherit the team, but a potential ownership stake would be a topic of conversation after the season. But as for the season, he did only coach those 16 games. The team won their first game under Magic against Milwaukee. Magic said that he didn't really know the offense that well, so he had Nick Van Exel call his own plays and then had the assistant coach, Bill Burtka, give him a running monologue of what the plays were that Van Exel was calling. So really, he was just kind of observing the first game. The Lakers won their second game on a Van Exel game winner against Minnesota. And then all of a sudden, they were only 3.5 games back from making the playoffs. Denver was the team to beat, and the Lakers had 2 games remaining against them. And Magic began kind of saying, hey, it would be fun to return next year as well. I kind of like this coaching thing. Winning is fun. He was 3-1 when he said that. But soon enough, the Nuggets stopped losing. The Lakers again fell out of playoff contention. And then all of a sudden, literally days after Magic had said, I think I might return as head coach, he was saying, just the 16 games for me, that's all. And with the team falling out of the playoff race, they really just stopped responding to Magic. Anyone who hadn't played with him, basically, Kurt Rambis and James Worthy were still playing hard, but the young guys were just like, come on, the season's over. They went back to being as they had been under Fund, which the LA Times said was, quote, boring and sullen. When the head coach clearly doesn't want to be there, the team's not going to react or respond in the proper ways. And so as a result, they lost every game for the rest of the year. So Magic had led them to a 5-1 record with wins over Houston and Atlanta, each of whom were top 2 seeds in their respective conferences. But then the instant that the playoffs were out of reach, they lost 10 in a row. I would rate Magic as a bad coach. It's hard to say if he's the worst coach in franchise history because Byron Scott does exist, but you just can't be an effective coach when you're flip-flopping every game on whether you're coming back next year. Players don't want to play in that kind of environment. After the season, though, he was able to convince Dr. Buss to sell him a 5% stake in the Lakers. So congratulations to Magic on that one. So now the final thing that I wanted to talk about this week was when Magic did actually complete a comeback and play for the Lakers in 1996. This time it was a little different. He was not going to be the starting point guard as he had been for basically every game of his playing career up to that point. Nick Van Exel really had that spot locked up. So Magic, when he returned to the Lakers, pretty unceremoniously in late January, he became the reserve power forward on the team, which, makes complete sense for any other 6'9" guy. But Magic in January just kind of started hanging out at the practice facility, participating in scrimmages, and then all of a sudden just said, hey, if there's a spot for me, sure, I'll play. And now there were only a couple players left on the team who'd ever played with Magic, and not too many of them had even played for him a couple years before. There was an established head coach in Del Harris. It wasn't going to be earth-shattering anymore if Magic came back, because it had been rumored and threatened and almost happened so many times at that point. And so, this time it did go better than his coaching stint had. He signed on January 29th. At the signing, he picked up the pen and then jokingly set it back down and said, I changed my mind, before actually signing it. So he's a joker too. So he signed on the 29th and played his first game in 4.5 years on the 30th. Came off the bench against the Golden State Warriors, put up 19 points, 8 rebounds, and 10 assists. Absolutely insane. After a 4.5-year layoff, comes off the bench, plays 27 minutes, and puts up a near triple-double. He was a shot in the arm to everybody in the team except for Cedric Ceballos, who had been an all-star the previous year and was not happy that his minutes were suddenly not getting eaten up, but taken a little bit up. Because, Ceballos was the starter and was a small forward, but, he had been an all-star the year before. He had a big ego. He thought that he was the star player. He had literally nicknamed himself Chize, short for franchise, as in the franchise player. And suddenly he was out of the spotlight. So he acted out by going AWOL. He no-call, no-showed the Lakers and went off to Arizona. He claimed that he had bought a boat in LA, went out to Lake Havasu in Arizona, which was 5 hours away from Los Angeles. Why are you doing that in the middle of the season? Got out on the lake and the motor failed, and he was stranded. He said, I'm going to fly up to Seattle for the game against the Sonics. I'll meet you guys there, but he never did. So he was benched for a few games in favor of Magic, which I'm sure just ate him up. And then Magic went back to the bench. But when Magic joined the team, they were 24-18, the 6th seed in the West. And by the end of the season, he and the team had gotten themselves up to the 4th seed at 53-29. And Magic was playing, especially for somebody who hadn't played basketball in 4.5 years, but really for any player, he was playing really, really well. Coming off the bench and putting up 14.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, about 7 assists on above league average efficiency. Obviously, he's an all-time great. He did have his criticisms of the way that things were after the Lakers lost game 1 to the Houston Rockets in the playoffs. He called out Del Harris for being indecisive about how he was going to be used against the Rockets. In the first half, he wasn't supposed to post up at all. And in the second half, he was only supposed to post up, which may have just been that Magic was super versatile and Del Harris wanted to throw a bunch of things at the Rockets while, it was early in the series, see what works. But it didn't work. And Magic was okay with either a ball handling role or a post player role, but he wanted it to be consistent. Magic said that the kind of team that the Lakers were being in that moment with that kind of indecision was the kind of team that he loved to play against, but not for. Magic did score well in game 2, which was a Lakers win, but they lost games 3 and 4 and lost the best of 5 series to the reigning back-to-back champion Houston Rockets. After that, Magic flirted again with a return to the Lakers or possibly to the Miami Heat to play for Pat Riley. But again, for the last time, genuinely for the last time, he retired from professional basketball in May of 1996, going out on his own terms. The fact that Nick Van Exel was going to be the future for the Lakers, and as such, Coach Del Harris was not going to give Magic the starting point guard position that he wanted, surely that had no bearing on Magic's decision to retire. But this time it wasn't an abrupt retirement forced by a disease that he had contracted. It was a natural resting place for a Hall of Fame career. He was still productive. He could have hung on. He could have kept playing and put up numbers, but he had proven what he needed to prove. He had all the accolades, and now he was choosing to step away from the game when it felt right to him. And I think it's the right decision because, seeing Magic in a Heat uniform or a couple of the other places that he was rumored to potentially go were the Knicks, the Pacers, the Pistons. seeing Magic wear something other than 32 on the Lakers or one of his horrendous ties on the sideline, it would feel icky and weird. And yeah, so that concludes the 4 phases of Magic's career after he was forced into retirement. There were some other things that I didn't want to go fully into, but as I mentioned briefly, his talk show, The Magic Hour, which aired for 3 months only, he played basketball in Sweden and Denmark, a handful of games in each country. Right after he retired in 1991, he feuded with President Bush over his inaction with regard to HIV and AIDS. Magic was on an AIDS task force, but stepped down when he realized that President Bush did not care about the panel's recommendations and wasn't going to do anything about the AIDS crisis. Who would have thought that Ronald Reagan's vice president would also not give a shit about AIDS? Magic also started a chain of movie theaters, literally just called Magic Johnson Theaters. There are still 2 left in operation now, one in Harlem and one in a suburb of DC, so that's interesting. And of course became president of basketball operations for the Lakers in 2017. Quit abruptly in a viral moment in 2019 ahead of a game against the Trailblazers. I remember exactly where I was actually when that happened, because I got the Woj notification. I started watching, I guess, like Sportsnet Lakers or something. I was on the basketball court at the Jewish Community Center here in Memphis, and I was fully afraid that he was doing this because he had gotten bad news from his doctors and he was about to die. That was a genuine fear that I was like, I texted a bunch of my friends and I was like, oh my God, I think Magic might be dying. But it turns out that he is just insane, which we love here on the Backfired NBA History Podcast. Magic, you're the freak of the week every week. In the future, I will cover his presidency of the Lakers, but I'm gonna spread that out a little bit and bid you adieu for the night. Let me know what you think of the new logo, by the way. I was up in the lab late into the night on Sunday or Monday cooking that up. I like it. I think it pops. I like the font. I like the old one too, but I like this one. Follow the socials at Backfired NBA Pod on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. My personal Twitter is at LogicMaster with a 0 for the O. And yeah, I greatly appreciate you listening. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. And we will talk next week. Have a good one.
Baby, are you gonna be the one that saves me? And after all, you're my wonder wall.